Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In my previous video, I promised to dissect the red flags I spotted during my Japanese job interview. Before we dive in, I want to make it clear that this is not about generalizing an entire culture. This is a testimony of my experience at a very unusual company. While we'll be discussing some very questionable practices, it's important to remember that such misdoings can happen in any company worldwide. However, in this channel, we'll explore how these situations unfold in Japan, and I personally do not think that the behavior of the people I had to deal with at that firm reflect the values I usually encounter in Japan outside the workplace. Now that being said, let's get started and see what insights we can uncover from these experiences. Before we jump in, don't forget to smash that like button, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss my crazy chronicles at that crazy company. Let's go. So, this is the debrief video of the first part of my chronicles in Japan, and there were 2 red flags in that interview. Now, without further ado, red flag number 1. Red flag number 1 unfolded right at the start. Picture this. I'm in the interview room, and my would-be boss, Dumbo, makes this perfectly timed entrance after being announced. Too perfect. It's like he was either listening through the door or perhaps connected to the conference call device in the room. Sounds paranoid, right? But it was the truth. In this company, spying wasn't just a pastime, it was an institutionalized sport. People hiding in team meetings, secretly dialing into conference rooms, and muting themselves to eavesdrop. You name it. Dumbo here was an ace in corporate espionage. In this case, all they had to do was set up the call beforehand, put themselves on mute, and listen. But why all this espionage? In Japanese companies, employee surveillance isn't just common, it's a given. When you think about it, this is a foundation, a necessary tool for power harassment, which is very common in Japan. It is mastered to an art form, and being new or seemingly unimportant doesn't save you, especially if you're a foreigner like me. Being a foreigner comes with a double dose of suspicion. First, you're perceived as a threat to their strict work culture, where even smiling can raise eyebrows. Second, if you're part of a company with headquarters abroad, congrats! You're now a walking, talking security risk. And I am going to elaborate on that in a minute through red flag number 2, but keep in mind that I was hired by the boss of the village clown. So I had a target the size of Montana Eye on my back. So there I was, unknowingly cast in some sort of corporate spy movie. I never forgot that I would be listened to probably at every meetings I took. Enter red flag number 2 with the village clown. Remember, it involves the village clown, the CEO, I mean. During the interview, I asked innocent, reasonable questions to show my interest in the company I was about to join, but the CEO's reaction was a clear red flag. He seemed visibly annoyed by my queries, yet he said nothing. His demeanor suggested that he was so entrenched in his traditional ways, viewing questioning as bad and blind obedience as good. And guys, I was right. Always listen to your guts. This guy would contort himself to impress foreign bosses, using business codes he learned abroad to portray a company with progressive values. Abroad, he's all chummy, insisting on nicknames, but don't you dare try that in Japan. He even put a threat on a training in that regard. So you got it, he was the sort of leader who thought people should not dare ask questions and have people working Japanese way. But he did not want the headquarter to know it. So, at the interview, when I dared asking question, he was clearly fuming. I could smell the smoke coming out of his nose. He just clenched his jaw and obviously silently swore to make me pay one day to teach me how things work here. How do I know it? Hell, he did it. But that is not the point here. The point is that he said nothing. He said nothing because he knew I would likely put it in the 90 days newcomer survey. It may sound very insignificant, just another coward leader on the streets, right? Let me explain why it's not. Here's an example for context. I once worked at a domestic Japanese company. It was a different cultural environment. On my first day, I was being given a tour of the offices, and they showed me some company products. Naturally curious, I asked a couple of questions about them, but to my surprise, I was asked to stop asking questions. There was no ambiguity about it. Asking questions was a no-no. And you know what? That was okay. There were no hard feelings. It was understood. It was cultural. It wasn't personal. It was just how you were expected to behave in that particular environment. In a way, they had no problem being straightforward, as it felt normal to stop questions. So it is cultural and no harm was meant. Then knowing if an employee finds it right or wrong is another debate. But I was cool with that and adapted how and when one should ask questions in that company. But with the village clown, it was a different story. It was pure hypocrisy. He was willingly having 2 faces, instilling fear in Japan to control the information that would go in and out. He even had mailing lists created for Japan with only 5 of his most trusted employees, all friends and family, who would receive the group newsletter, so they could filter the communications from the group. I was even handed a restrictive list of people abroad I was allowed to speak with by the CEO. Step outside this list? Well, let's just say I prefer not to meet the little hands of Yakuzas in front of my favorite onsen. And this adds up with other things that happened at the interview. How he tried to fish by sending Barbie and her inquisitive personal questions implying I was in Japan with an uncle. Then Dumbo trying to scare me into telling him, how do I know the man who hired me? Madison. It all shows that the second red flag really is about how the village clown wants to keep doors closed on what is going on in Japan, which I discovered sooner than later. So there you have it, folks. 2 massive red flags, flapping in the wind. And you know what? They were lessons in disguise. Lessons about corporate culture, navigating interviews, and the importance of trusting your gut. Stay tuned for the next video, where I'll be talking about my first 2 weeks at the company and how I quickly understood why they were so alert on my arrival. Got any wild interview stories of your own? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more revealing content. Until next time, stay sharp and keep an eye out for those red flags. Bye.